There comes a moment in every man's life when he realizes he's become invisible. For Russell Danner, that moment had stretched into years, years of unanswered phone calls from his children, years of eating dinner alone, years of wondering if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. At 64, he'd made peace with being forgotten. He spent his Saturdays at storage unit auctions, bidding on abandoned belongings, hoping to find something worth a few dollars. When he won Unit 47, he expected junk. Instead, he found journals and blueprints from a dead billionaire, inventions that had quietly changed the world, technologies worth fortunes, hidden and forgotten. What would you do if you suddenly held something the world had been searching for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Russell Danner woke at 5:30 on Saturday morning, the way he always did, no alarm needed. His body had learned the rhythm of loneliness early rising because there was no reason to stay in bed, no warm body beside him, no soft breathing to listen to in the dark. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of his small rental apartment, counting the cracks in the plaster, 14 visible from his pillow. He'd counted them so many times he could map them with his eyes closed. The apartment was quiet. It was always quiet. One bedroom, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a bathroom where the faucet dripped, no matter how many times he tried to fix it. The living room held a sagging couch he'd picked up at an estate sale 3 years ago, a coffee table with one leg shorter than the others, and a television that got basic channels when the weather cooperated. On the walls, nothing. He'd taken down the family photos after the first year of silence. It hurt too much to look at them. He pushed himself out of bed, his knees protesting the movement. 64 wasn't old, not really, but his body carried the weight of 40 years in factory work. He'd been a supervisor at Brennan Manufacturing, overseeing the assembly line, making sure quotas were met and safety protocols followed. Good pay, decent benefits, enough to buy a house in a neighborhood where kids played in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Russell shuffled to the kitchenette and started the coffee maker, a cheap drip machine that sputtered and hissed. While it brewed, he stood at the window and looked out at the parking lot. His truck sat in its assigned spot, a '98 Ford with rust eating through the wheel wells and a transmission that slipped when the weather got cold. But it ran. That was enough. The coffee finished. He poured a cup, black, no sugar, sat at the small table that served as his dining room, office, and everything else. The newspaper lay folded there from yesterday. He couldn't afford a subscription anymore, but the diner down the street let him take the previous day's copy. He read it while he drank his coffee, though he rarely remembered what he'd read an hour later. His mind wandered, the way it often did in the morning, back to when this table had been bigger, round, made of real oak, when 3 other people sat around it, his wife, Claire, his daughter, Annie, his son, Greg. Breakfast had been loud then, arguing over who got the comics first, Claire reminding the kids about homework, Russell sneaking an extra piece of bacon when no one was looking. The divorce had come 8 years ago. Not explosive, not bitter, just finished. Claire had met someone else, a man who worked in pharmaceutical sales, made 3 times what Russell's pension provided. She'd been kind about it, apologetic even. "We've grown apart," she'd said. "We want different things now." Russell hadn't known how to argue with that. Maybe they had grown apart. Maybe he'd been too focused on work, too tired when he came home, too comfortable in routine. She'd remarried within a year, moved to Arizona with her new husband. The kids had been grown by then, Annie, 26, Greg, 24, both building their own lives, their own careers. Annie was a dental hygienist in Oregon, married with 2 kids. Russell had met exactly once, at the wedding. Greg was in IT, lived in Colorado, sent Christmas cards with generic messages printed inside. At first, they'd called, weekly, then monthly. Russell had tried to stay connected. Of the port was live, but the conversations felt forced. How's work? Fine, Dad. How are the grandkids? Growing fast. Long pauses filled with nothing to say. Eventually, the calls became texts. Then the texts became sporadic. Then they stopped. He'd called on their birthdays, left voicemails, sent cards with checks inside for the grandkids. The cards were never acknowledged. The checks were cashed. 3 years ago, he'd stopped trying so hard. What was the point? They had their lives. He had his. Russell finished his coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. The clock on the microwave read 6:47. The auction started at 9, but he liked to get there early, walk the facility, see what units were up for bid. It gave him something to do, somewhere to be, and occasionally, if he was lucky and bid smart, he found something worth reselling at the weekend flea market. He showered, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt worn soft from washing, pulled on his work boots. The leather was cracked, but the soles were good. He grabbed his wallet thin, containing his driver's license, a debit card, and $43 in cash, and headed out. The storage facility was on the east side of town, a sprawling complex of identical buildings painted beige, numbered in a system that made no sense to anyone but the manager. Russell had been coming here for 2 years, almost every Saturday. He knew the regulars. There was Pete, a retired plumber who specialized in tools. Doris, a widow who bought clothes and linens to resell online. A younger guy everyone called Flip, who'd turned storage auctions into a side business, had a YouTube channel about it. They nodded to each other, but rarely talked. This wasn't a social club. Everyone was here for the same reason: to survive, to make ends meet, to find something valuable in what others had abandoned. The auctioneer was a man named Rory, mid-50s, with a belly that hung over his belt and a voice that carried across the parking lot. He ran a fair auction, didn't play favorites, kept things moving. Russell respected that. This morning, there was a bigger crowd than usual. Russell counted at least 30 people, maybe more. New faces mixed with the regulars. Something was up. He walked over to Pete, who was studying a clipboard with the day's listings. "Big turnout," Russell said. Pete looked up, nodded. "You hear about Unit 47? Russell shook his head. "Belonged to some rich guy. Tech billionaire or something. Died a few years back. No family. Nobody claimed it. Company finally gave up on getting paid, putting it up for auction." "What's in it?" Pete shrugged. "Nobody knows. That's why all these vultures showed up, thinking they'll find stock certificates or gold bars or who knows what." Russell felt a small flicker of something in his chest. Curiosity, maybe, or just the hope that came with possibility. "You gonna bid?" "Probably not. These feeding frenzies drive the price up too high. I'll stick to the smaller units, find my tools, go home." Russell nodded. That was the smart play. Don't get caught up in the excitement. Don't bid more than you can afford to lose. But he stayed. The auction moved methodically through the morning. Rory worked his way down the list, unit by unit. Number 12 went for $80 boxes of old clothes and a broken lawnmower. Number 18 brought 200 furniture that might clean up decent. Pete won number 23 for 150. Grinned when he saw the toolboxes inside. Russell watched, hands in his pockets, doing the math in his head each time. What could he afford? What was worth the risk? He bid twice, lost both times when the price climbed past his comfort zone. That was fine. There were always more auctions, more Saturdays, more chances. By 11 o'clock, they'd worked through most of the list. The crowd had thinned slightly. Some people had won their units and left, others had given up and wandered off. But a core group remained, waiting. "All right, folks," Rory called out, consulting his clipboard. "Last one of the day. Unit 47. Now, I'm going to tell you up front, this one's been sealed for over 3 years. Rent was paid through an estate account until the money ran out. We don't know much about what's inside, but the original renter was a Theodore Ashford. Some of you might recognize that name. A murmur went through the crowd. Russell didn't recognize it, but clearly others did. "Company policy," Rory continued. "I can only open it enough for you to see inside from the doorway. No touching, no digging through. You bid on what you see. Understood?" Everyone nodded. They walked as a group to Building C, down a row of identical orange doors. Unit 47 was in the back corner. Rory produced a key, worked it into the padlock. The lock was heavy, corroded with rust, like it hadn't been opened in years. It took him 2 tries to get it free. "Here we go," Rory said, and rolled the door up 3 feet. Light spilled into the darkness. Russell moved closer with the others, craning to see. The unit was packed, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Industrial metal shelving lined both sides, stacked with cardboard boxes, plastic bins, sealed drums with hazard labels. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows. Furniture, a desk, chairs, a bookshelf occupied the middle space. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust that swirled in the sunlight. But what caught Russell's attention was the back wall. Unlike the organized chaos of boxes and equipment, that wall held something different. Leather-bound books, dozens of them, arranged carefully on custom shelving. Beside them, tubes that looked like they might contain architectural drawings or blueprints. And reel-to-reel tape boxes, the kind Russell remembered from his childhood, stacked in precise rows. "Bidding starts at $500, Rory announced. A hand went up immediately. 500. 600, someone else called. 800. Russell watched the numbers climb. 1,000. 1,500. 2,000. Hands dropped out one by one. The serious bidders remained 3 of them, including Flip, who probably smelled YouTube content. 2,500, Flip said confidently. 3,000. This from a woman Russell didn't recognize, well-dressed, looked like money. Flip hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back. 3,000 going once, Rory said. "Do I hear 32? Silence. Going twice. Russell's hand went up. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it. His arm just rose, like it belonged to someone else. 3,200 from the gentleman in the flannel, Rory said. "Do I hear 35? The well-dressed woman looked at Russell, sizing him up. Then she shook her head and walked away. 3,200 going once, going twice. Rory's gavel came down on his clipboard. "Sold to the gentleman in flannel. Come see me for paperwork." Russell's heart hammered in his chest. $3,200. That was nearly everything he had. His savings account held $3,800, money he'd been setting aside for emergencies. For when the truck finally died, or the landlord raised the rent, or his teeth needed work. What had he just done? He paid Rory in cash and with a debit card, fingers trembling slightly as he entered his PIN. Signed the papers. Received the key and a pair of bolt cutters for the padlock. "You've got 30 days to clear it out," Rory said. "After that, we start charging storage fees again." Russell nodded, pocketed the key, and walked back to his truck in a daze. That night, he barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at those 14 ceiling cracks, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. $3,200 gone. For what? Boxes of junk that had been abandoned for 3 years. But he kept seeing that back wall, those leather-bound books, the careful organization despite years of neglect. Someone had cared about what was in that unit. Someone had arranged it deliberately, preserved it intentionally. At dawn, Russell gave up on sleep. He made coffee, ate a piece of toast, and drove back to the storage facility. The parking lot was empty. Sunday morning, the office was closed, but renters had access to their units 24 hours a day. Russell parked near Building C, grabbed a flashlight from his glove box, and walked to Unit 47. His hands shook slightly as he fitted the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly. He removed the lock, set it aside, and gripped the door handle. This was it, the moment of truth. Either he'd just bought $3,200 worth of garbage, or he rolled the door up. The sunlight was different in the early morning, softer, angled low. It cut through the dust and illuminated the space with golden light. Russell stepped inside carefully, mindful of where he placed his feet. The air smelled stale, like old paper and metal and time itself. He walked slowly down the center aisle, looking at everything. The boxes were labeled in neat handwriting: dates, categories, contents, correspondence, 1,972 to 1,975, patent applications rejected, prototype materials handle with care. The filing cabinets were locked, but Russell could see through the gaps that they were full. Documents, folders, organized meticulously. He reached the back wall and stood before the leather-bound books. Journals, he realized, dated by year, starting in 1967 and running all the way to 2018. Beside them, the blueprint tubes were labeled with technical terms Russell didn't understand. Capacitive touch, interface reverend. 4. Lithium polymer battery design final draft. Solar conversion efficiency model. Russell pulled the 1967 journal from the shelf. The leather was soft, well worn. He opened it carefully. The first page, in that same neat handwriting: Theodore Ashford, Personal Journal, January 1967. If anyone ever reads this, know that I tried. I tried to matter. Russell stood there in the dusty silence, holding a dead man's words, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't junk, this was a life. Someone's entire existence, packed into a storage unit and forgotten. He sat down on the dusty floor, back against the wall, and began to read. Russell spent the entire day in that storage unit. He told himself he'd just look through a few pages, get a sense of what he'd bought, then go home and make a plan. But Theodore Ashford's words pulled him in, page after page, hour after hour. The 1967 journal began with the enthusiasm of a young man. Theodore had been 23, fresh out of a state college with a degree in electrical engineering. No family money, no connections, just a mind that saw possibilities everywhere. The entries described his first apartment, a studio with a hot plate and a shared bathroom down the hall. His first job at a manufacturing company, designing circuit boards for radios. But the real passion showed up in the evening entries. After work, Theodore would go home and tinker. He'd buy broken electronics from pawn shops, take them apart, study how they worked, imagine how they could work better. The journal pages were filled with sketches, calculations, ideas that seemed to pour out of him faster than he could write them down. Russell recognized something in those pages, the loneliness between the lines. Theodore never wrote about friends or dates or weekend plans, just work, and then his projects, alone in that studio apartment. Building, testing, failing, trying again. By 1968, Theodore had left the manufacturing job and started contracting with a larger electronics firm. Better pay, more freedom, access to better equipment. The journal entries grew more technical, harder for Russell to follow, but the personal notes remained simple and clear. The 14th of June 1968. Finished the prototype today. It works. It actually works. I can't wait to show them tomorrow. This could change everything. The next entry, dated 2 days later, was shorter. They said no. Not viable. Not what the market wants. I know I'm right. I know this matters. But maybe I don't know how to make them see it. Russell turned the pages slowly, watching the pattern emerge. Theodore would create something, get excited, present it to the company, and get rejected. Sometimes politely, sometimes dismissively. The journal tracked each rejection like a wound that wouldn't heal. But Theodore never stopped. That was what struck Russell most. After every rejection, there would be a few entries of doubt and frustration. Then Theodore would start on something new. A different approach, a new invention, another attempt to prove his worth. Russell stood up, his back stiff from sitting on concrete. He needed to stretch, needed to think. He walked to the front of the unit and looked at the boxes stacked on the industrial shelving, pulled one down at random. Inside were folders, each labeled with a patent application number and date. Russell opened the first one. The application was for something called a multi-touch capacitive sensor array, dated 1975. The technical drawings were meticulous, hand-drafted with precision. Attached to the application was a rejection letter from the patent office. While the concept shows creativity, the practical applications are limited. The technology required to manufacture such a device does not currently exist. Application denied. Russell pulled out his phone. He'd been in the unit so long the battery was down to 30% and searched for capacitive touchscreen history. The results told him that the first multi-touch screen was developed in the mid-1980 seconds, became commercially viable in the 2000s, and was now in every smartphone on the planet. Theodore had sketched it out in 1975. A decade before anyone else. Russell sat down again, this time on a dusty chair, and opened another folder. This one contained designs for a rechargeable battery using lithium polymer chemistry, dated 1982. Another rejection letter, not commercially viable at this time. He searched his phone again. Lithium polymer batteries became standard in consumer electronics in the 1990 seconds. Another folder, water purification system using UV light and specialized filters, dated 1989, rejected as unnecessarily complex. UV water purification was now sold by dozens of companies, exactly as Theodore had described it. Russell felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just a collection of random ideas. This was proof that Theodore Ashford had invented, or at least independently conceived, technologies that went on to become billion-dollar industries. And nobody had listened to him. He spent the next hour going through more boxes, more folders. The pattern was consistent. Theodore would develop something, patent application would be filed, rejection would come back. Sometimes the rejection was from the patent office. Sometimes from companies Theodore had approached directly. The letters were always polite, professional, and devastating. "We appreciate your submission, but this doesn't align with our current product roadmap. Interesting concept, but we don't see a market for this application. We've decided to pursue other technologies at this time." And then, years later, those same companies would release products using nearly identical technology. Russell found newspaper clippings that Theodore had saved, articles about groundbreaking innovations that were anything but new. Theodore had written notes in the margins, not angry notes, just sad ones. They did it, just like I said. 10 years later, but they did it. I wonder if anyone there remembers when I showed them this. At least someone made it work. That's what matters, isn't it? Who? Russell looked up from the papers, his eyes burning with dust and something else. Tears, maybe. For a man he'd never met. A man who'd spent his entire life being right and being ignored. He pulled out the journal from 1995, skipped ahead to a random page. The 22nd of March, 1995. I'm 51 today. No one called. No one remembers. I used to think that didn't matter, that the work was enough, that someday people would understand what I was trying to do. But I'm starting to realize that legacy isn't about being right, it's about being heard, and I've spent my whole life talking to people who weren't listening. Russell closed the journal carefully, set it on his lap. He sat there in the silence of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of a brilliant, lonely life. His phone buzzed. A text message. He looked at the screen, hope rising before he could stop it. Maybe his daughter, maybe his son. It was his phone company, reminding him his bill was due in 3 days. Russell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Here he was, sitting in a dead man's storage unit, reading about loneliness, and his own phone only buzzed for bills and spam. He and Theodore weren't so different. He loaded several boxes into his truck before the sun set: the journals, the patent applications, the most important-looking folders. He'd come back tomorrow for more, and the day after that, however long it took, because someone needed to know about Theodore Ashford. Someone needed to hear what he'd been trying to say all those years, and Russell was going to make sure they did. Monday morning, Russell called in sick to the part-time job he'd picked up at a hardware store. It wasn't really sick, but he couldn't face restocking shelves and helping customers find the right size screws. Not today. Not with Theodore's voice still echoing in his head from those journal pages. He spent the morning at his apartment, clearing off his small dining table, organizing what he'd brought home. The journals went in chronological order along one side, the patent applications in another stack, sorted by date, the newspaper clippings and rejection letters in a third pile. Looking at it all spread out, Russell realized he needed help. He didn't understand half the technical terminology. He couldn't evaluate whether Theodore's designs were truly revolutionary or just the work of an enthusiastic amateur. He needed someone who knew about patents, about intellectual property, about how to prove that ideas mattered. He found a lawyer's office downtown, a small practice that advertised free initial consultation on their website. The attorney's name was Walter Kemp. His photo showed a man in his 60s with grey hair and kind eyes. Russell called, explained briefly what he wanted to discuss, and was told to come in that afternoon. The office was modest, tucked above a dry cleaner on Main Street. Walter Kemp met Russell in a small conference room with water-stained ceiling tiles and furniture that had seen better decades. But his handshake was firm, and his attention was complete. "So," Walter said, settling into his chair, "you mentioned something about patents and inventions from a storage unit?" Russell had brought copies of 3 patent applications and their rejection letters. He laid them on the table between them and explained how he'd won the auction, what he'd found, what he'd spent the last 2 days reading. Walter picked up the first application, the capacitive touchscreen design, from 1975. He read it slowly, his expression neutral. Then he pulled out his phone, did some searching, and his eyebrows rose. "This predates the first commercial multi-touch screen by over a decade," Walter said quietly, "if this is authentic." "It's authentic," Russell said. "The patent office stamp is right there. The date is clear." Walter picked up the second application, the battery design from 1982. Read it, searched again, and set it down carefully. "Mr. Danner, do you understand what you might have here? I have proof that Theodore Ashford invented things before other people got credit for them. You have potential evidence of prior art. If these documents can be authenticated, they could challenge existing patents. They could prove that current technologies were independently conceived years before they were commercialized." "That's," Walter paused, choosing his words carefully, "that's significant." Russell shook his head. "I don't care about challenging patents or lawsuits or any of that. I just want people to know Theodore existed, that he mattered, that his ideas were real." Walter studied Russell for a long moment. "That's a rare thing, Mr. Danner. Most people who come to me with something like this want to know how much money they can make. I spent $3,200 I couldn't afford because something told me that storage unit mattered. Now I know why. Theodore spent his whole life being ignored. I'm not going to ignore him." Walter leaned back in his chair. "All right, here's what I can tell you. Getting Theodore's story recognized, really recognized, will require documentation, authentication, probably expert testimony. You'll need to contact historians, technology experts, maybe journalists. It's going to take time and effort." "I've got both," Russell said. "There's also a complication. If Theodore worked for companies during the time he developed some of these inventions, those companies might claim ownership. Employment contracts often include clauses about intellectual property created during the period of employment. Russell felt his stomach tighten. So they could take everything? They could try. But if you're not seeking financial compensation, if your goal is purely historical recognition, that changes the dynamic. Most companies won't fight to suppress information it looks bad. They'd rather let it fade away quietly. I'm not going to let it fade away. Walter smiled. I can see that. How about this? I'll help you identify which documents need authentication and point you toward people who might be interested in Theodore's story. No charge. I'm curious now too. Russell felt relief wash over him. Thank you. But Mr. Danner, you should know once you start putting this out there, once people realize what you have, things could get complicated. Are you prepared for that? Russell thought about his quiet apartment, his routine Saturdays, his silent phone. My life isn't complicated right now. Maybe it should be. That evening, Russell stopped by a pawn shop on his way home. He'd remembered seeing old electronics there before, including tape players. He found what he needed for $40, a reel-to-reel tape player, dusty but functional. The owner threw in a power cord and didn't ask questions. Back at his apartment, Russell set up the tape player on his coffee table. He'd brought home 3 tapes from the storage unit, labeled in Theodore's handwriting. Personal Reflections 1982, Design Notes Various, Final Thoughts 2015. He started with the 1982 tape, carefully threading it through the machine the way he remembered from his youth. His father had owned a reel-to-reel, used it to record family gatherings. Russell hadn't thought about that in years. He pressed play. There was a hiss of tape, then a voice, clear, measured, with a slight hesitation between words. Theodore Ashford, speaking from 40 years ago. March 15th, 1982. I've just returned from Patterson Electronics, showed them the battery design, the lithium polymer concept I've been developing for 3 years. I really thought this time would be different. The tests were conclusive. The efficiency ratings were 30% better than anything currently available. The safety features solved every concern about lithium instability. A long pause. Russell heard Theodore take a breath. They said it was impractical, too expensive to manufacture. No market demand for higher capacity portable power sources. I tried to explain that the market doesn't know what it wants until you show them. That's how innovation works. You create the capability first, then people find uses for it. Another pause, longer this time. But they weren't listening. They never really listen. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent 35 years trying to be heard, trying to matter, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these ideas aren't as good as I think they are. Maybe I'm just... His voice caught, recovered. Maybe I'm just a man talking to himself in an empty room, recording thoughts no one will ever hear. The tape continued, but Russell had to stop it. He sat there on his sagging couch in his quiet apartment, listening to the silence that followed Theodore's words. A man talking to himself in an empty room. Russell understood that more than Theodore could have ever known. He picked up his phone, pulled up his son's contact, stared at it, typed out a message. Found something incredible at an auction. Would love to tell you about it. Call when you can. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. The phone didn't ring. The rejection letters arrived in a folder Russell found 3 days later, buried in one of the filing cabinets he'd hauled back to his apartment. The drawer had been stuck, the metal warped from years in storage, and it took him 20 minutes and a can of WD-40 to get it open. Inside were hundreds of letters, organized chronologically in manila folders, labeled by decade. 1,960 seconds. 1,970 seconds. 1,980 seconds. And on, all the way to 2010 seconds. Russell spread them across his living room floor because there was nowhere else with enough space. He sat cross-legged in the middle of them, reading one after another, watching Theodore's life unfold in a pattern of hope and disappointment. The earliest letters were almost encouraging. "Thank you for your submission. While we cannot move forward at this time, we encourage you to continue your innovative work." Polite, professional, the kind of rejection that didn't quite close the door. But as the years progressed, the tone shifted. The letters became more perfunctory, more dismissive, not aligned with our current initiatives, lacks commercial viability, does not meet our criteria for investment. Some weren't even personalized, form letters with Theodore's name typed into a blank space. And then there were the ones that hurt most to read. The letters that came after Theodore had already seen his ideas become successful in someone else's hands. The 3rd of August 1999. Dear Mr. Ashford, thank you for bringing to our attention your prior work on touchscreen interface technology. However, as our legal team has reviewed the matter, we find no evidence of patent infringement or intellectual property violation. Your 1975 patent application was rejected and therefore holds no legal standing. We consider this matter closed. Russell found Theodore's handwritten note stapled to that letter. They're selling millions of devices using exactly what I showed them in 1975. But because the patent office said no, it doesn't matter that I was first. It doesn't matter that I was right. Russell had to stop reading. He stood up, walked to his kitchenette, made coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands. He was angry, more angry than he'd been in years. Angry at the companies who dismissed Theodore. Angry at the patent system that had failed him. Angry at a world that rewarded the well-connected and ignored the brilliant outsider. But underneath the anger was something else. Recognition. Because wasn't Russell's own life a similar pattern? Years of showing up, doing good work, being reliable, and then being set aside when the factory downsized. Replaced by younger workers who cost less. His experience, his dedication, suddenly not viable, not aligned with current initiatives. He'd been rejected too in his own way, maybe not with formal letters but with silence, with unreturned phone calls from his children. With the empty chair across the table where his wife used to sit, his phone buzzed. Russell grabbed it quickly, hope flaring. A spam call about extended auto warranties. He set the phone down and went back to the letters. By mid-afternoon he'd read through the entire collection. Decades of rejection, documented and preserved. Why had Theodore kept them all? Most people would have thrown them away, tried to forget. But Theodore had saved every single one, organized them, filed them carefully. Maybe he'd hoped that someday someone would see them and understand. That the pattern of rejection would itself be proof that something had gone wrong, that talent and truth weren't always enough. Russell pulled out another tape, labeled Personal Reflections 1995. He loaded it into the player and pressed play. Theodore's voice came through, older than on the 1982 recording. Tired. June 7th, 1995. I went to the park today, the one on Maple Street, near the elementary school. I do that sometimes, when I need to remember why any of this matters. Families go there on weekends, parents and children, playing, laughing, connected to each other in ways I never learned how to be. A long pause. There was one family today, father, probably in his 30s, 2 kids, maybe 7 and 9. They were flying a kite, or trying to. The kite kept crashing, and every time it did, they'd all laugh, and the father would show them how to adjust the string, how to feel the wind, how to try again. Theodore's voice softened. I sat on a bench and watched them for an hour. The father was patient, kind. You could see how much they loved him, how much he loved them. And I thought that's what matters. Not patents or inventions or being right. Connection. Being part of something bigger than yourself. Having people who care whether you exist. Another pause, this one painful in its length. I've never had that. I've spent 60 years creating things, trying to contribute, trying to matter, but I'm not connected to anyone. I have no family, no children, no one who'd notice if I disappeared tomorrow. And all these inventions, all this work, what does it mean if there's no one to remember it, no one to care? The tape continued, but Russell stopped it. He couldn't listen anymore. Theodore had watched him. That family in the park that had been Russell, Annie and Greg. He was sure of it. Maple Street Park was where they'd gone every Sunday when the kids were young. Russell had taught them to fly kites there, in that exact scenario Theodore described. He could picture the scene clearly. Annie in her pink jacket, Greg with his untied shoelaces, Claire spreading a blanket for their picnic. Theodore had sat on a bench and watched Russell's happiness, not knowing that 20 years later Russell would sit in an empty apartment reading about it. Not knowing that the family Theodore had envied would fracture and scatter, that the father who'd looked so connected, so loved, would end up just as alone. Russell walked to his bedroom closet and pulled out the box he'd hidden there after the divorce, the one with the family photos he couldn't bear to display but couldn't bring himself to throw away. He carried it back to the living room and opened it. Pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the trip to the Grand Canyon, Annie's high school graduation, Greg's wedding, moments frozen in time when his family had been whole. He found the photo he was looking for, Maple Street Park, probably 1997 or 1998. Russell and the kids with a red kite soaring behind them. Claire had taken the picture. You could see Russell's smile, genuine and unguarded. You could see the kids' joy. Theodore had watched that moment, had sat alone on a bench and envied what Russell had. And now Russell sat alone in his apartment, envying what Theodore had witnessed. The irony was almost too much to bear. Walter called on Thursday morning with news. He'd reached out to a technology journalist who specialized in innovation history, a writer for a major publication. She was interested in Theodore's story. Her name is Patricia Vance, Walter said. She's done pieces on forgotten inventors before, uncredited contributors to major breakthroughs. I sent her some of the documents you showed me. She wants to meet you. Russell agreed, and they set up a meeting for Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Russell spent Friday organizing his materials, making copies of the most significant documents, trying to figure out how to explain Theodore's life to someone who'd never met him. Saturday arrived too quickly. Russell dressed carefully clean jeans, his good flannel shirt, boots he'd polished the night before. He arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and ordered black coffee he was too nervous to drink. Patricia Vance arrived exactly on time. She was younger than Russell expected, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back and sharp, intelligent eyes behind simple glasses. She carried a leather messenger bag and moved with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste time. "Mr. Danner," she extended her hand. "Patricia Vance, thank you for meeting with me." Her handshake was firm. Professional. She ordered tea and sat across from him in the corner booth he'd chosen for privacy. "Walter sent me preliminary scans of some documents," she said, pulling out a tablet. "I've spent the last few days doing research, and I have to tell you, Mr. Danner, if these are authentic, this is a remarkable story." Russell slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of patent applications, rejection letters, journal excerpts, and photographs of the prototypes still stored in the unit. "They're authentic. I have everything. Decades of work." Patricia opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. Her expression remained professional, but Russell saw the flicker of excitement in her eyes. She understood what she was looking at. "This circuit board," she said, pointing to a photograph. "You said it's dated 1975? Theodore hand-soldered it. The date stamp is on the back. I can show you the original." "I'd like that. I'll need to have it authenticated by an expert, but if this is genuine—" She paused, looking up at Russell. "Mr. Danner, why are you doing this? What do you want out of Theodore's story?" "I want people to know he existed," Russell said simply. That he was brilliant, that he tried, that he mattered. You don't want financial compensation? Because there might be legal avenues. No, Russell interrupted. This isn't about money. Theodore spent his whole life being ignored. I'm not going to let that continue. Patricia studied him for a long moment. That's refreshing. Most people I talk to want book deals or movie rights. They want credit for the discovery. I didn't discover anything except a storage unit. Theodore did all the work. Russell searched for the right words. I'm just making sure someone listens this time. All right, Patricia said, closing the folder. Here's what I'd like to do. I want to write a comprehensive piece about Theodore Ashford, his life, his work, his contributions to technology that were never recognized. I'll need access to all the materials, journals, prototypes, everything. I'll need to verify dates, authenticate documents, probably interview some experts about the technology itself. You can have access to whatever you need. This will take time, probably a few weeks, maybe a month. I want to do this right. And Mr. Danner, you should know once this goes public, there will be attention from other journalists, from historians, possibly from the companies whose patents might be affected. Are you prepared for that? Russell thought about his quiet life, his empty apartment, his silent phone. Yes. They spent the next hour going through the materials in detail. Patricia asked questions, took notes, photographed documents. She was thorough, professional, and genuinely fascinated by Theodore's story. As they were finishing, Patricia looked at Russell with curiosity. Can I ask you something personal? Why does this matter so much to you? Most people wouldn't spend their savings on a storage unit, wouldn't dedicate this much time to a stranger's legacy. Russell was quiet for a moment. Because I understand what it's like to be invisible, to wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. Theodore and we're not so different. Patricia's expression softened. That's going to be part of the story, you know. Not just Theodore, but you, the man who found him, who refused to let him be forgotten. That's not necessary. It's essential, Patricia said gently. The story isn't just about past injustice, it's about present connection, about someone caring enough to make things right. After Patricia left, Russell sat in the coffee shop for a while, watching people come and go. Couples, families, friends meeting for weekend conversations. Lives intersecting, connecting, mattering to each other. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, expecting another spam call. It was his daughter. A text message. Dad, I saw something online about a storage unit and inventions. Was that you? Call me. Russell stared at the message, his heart beating faster. She'd reached out. After months of silence, she'd reached out. He paid for his coffee and walked outside to call her. The phone rang twice before she answered. Dad? Annie. Hi. Yes, it was me. The storage unit. What's going on? The post I saw said you found some billionaire's inventions. Russell leaned against his truck, suddenly unsure how to explain everything. It's a long story. I went to an auction, won a storage unit, found journals and prototypes from an inventor named Theodore Ashford. He died a few years ago. No family. Nobody knew what happened to his work. And you're trying to what? Get him recognized? Something like that. There was a pause on the line. Russell could hear voices in the background, her husband, maybe her kids. That's really nice, Dad, that you care about some stranger like that. He wasn't really a stranger, Russell said quietly. I've been reading his journals. He was lonely, spent his whole life trying to matter, to be heard. Nobody listened. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, are we talking about him or about you? The question hit Russell in the chest. He opened his mouth to deny it, to say of course they were talking about Theodore, but the words wouldn't come. Annie, I'm sorry, she said, her voice thick. I'm sorry we stopped calling. I'm sorry we let so much time pass. That wasn't fair to you." Russell closed his eyes. "I could have tried harder too. Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe I could come visit next weekend. Bring the kids. They should know their grandfather." "I'd like that," Russell managed to say. After they hung up, Russell sat in his truck for a long time, looking at his phone, at his daughter's name, still on the screen. Theodore had watched Russell's family from a distance and envied their connection. Now that connection was finding its way back. Russell returned to the storage unit on Sunday morning, energized by his conversation with Annie in a way he hadn't felt in years. She was coming to visit. His grandchildren were coming. After so much silence, his family was reaching back. He wanted to retrieve more materials for Patricia, particularly the later journals and any documentation from Theodore's final years. The journalist had emphasized the importance of showing Theodore's entire life arc, not just his early innovations. The unit was exactly as he'd left it, still packed with boxes, still heavy with dust and the weight of forgotten time. Russell had made a significant dent in cataloging the contents, but there was still so much left to explore. He worked his way toward the back corner, an area he hadn't fully examined yet. Behind a stack of sealed plastic bins, he found a small lockbox he'd overlooked before. It was newer than most of the other items, the metal still shiny beneath the dust. The lock was a simple combination type. Russell tried a few obvious numbers: Theodore's birth year, the year of his first patent application. Nothing worked. He was about to set it aside when he noticed a small label affixed to the bottom. "If found, try 1997. 1. The year Theodore had gone to Maple Street Park, the year he'd watched Russell and his children fly kites. Russell dialed in the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside were recent documents, things from the 2010 seconds, based on the dates he could see. Photographs, some printed emails, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope. The envelope was yellowed at the edges but still crisp, as if it had been handled carefully. Written across the front in Theodore's handwriting, "To whoever finds this." Russell's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated March 2018, just months before Theodore's death. He began to read. "To whoever finds this, I am Theodore Ashford, and if you're reading these words, it means I've died and my storage unit has been auctioned off." That's exactly what I intended. Russell's breath caught. "I have no heirs, no family, no one to leave my life's work to. For years I struggled with what to do with all of this, decades of research, inventions, failed patents, and dreams that never materialized. I considered destroying it. Some nights I came very close, but I couldn't. Not because I think any of it matters in the grand scheme of things. The world moved on without me. The technologies I conceived were eventually developed by others, and life continued just fine. No, I kept it all because I hoped that maybe, somewhere, someone would find it and understand what I was trying to do. What I was trying to be." Russell had to stop reading for a moment. He sat down on a nearby crate, the letter still in his hands. "I've watched people from a distance my entire life. I was never good at connecting with others. Never learned how to build relationships, how to be part of a community. So I watched, and I envied, and I wondered what it would be like to matter to someone. There was one family in particular I observed over the years. I don't know their names. I never approached them, never introduced myself. But I used to see them at Maple Street Park in the late 1990s. A father with his 2 children, teaching them patience and kindness. Flying kites that kept crashing, but they'd laugh and try again." Russell's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes and kept reading. "I must have watched them a dozen times over several years. The father was everything I wasn't connected, loved, present in the moment. His children looked at him like he hung the moon. I used to sit on my bench and imagine what that must feel like. To be essential to someone. to be loved like that. I don't know what happened to that family. I hope the father appreciated what he had. I hope his children still visit him. I hope he knows how lucky he was to have those moments, even if they seemed ordinary at the time. Theodore's handwriting grew shakier in the next paragraph. I'm 74 now, and I'm tired. Tired of fighting to be heard, tired of being alone, tired of carrying all this work that no one wants. So, I've made a decision. I'm going to let the storage payment lapse. Eventually, when I die, the company will auction off the unit. Someone will buy it, probably hoping for something valuable they can resell. What they'll find instead is a life. My life. All of it. Documented and preserved. Maybe they'll throw it all away. Maybe they'll see the value in it. I won't know. And maybe that's better. But here's what I want whoever finds this to understand. I watched people live their lives, build their families, make their connections. I envied them. But I also learned from them. I learned that legacy isn't just about inventions or patents or being right. It's about being remembered by someone who cares. If you're reading this, you've already given me more than I had in life. You've cared enough to open this letter. You've acknowledged that I existed. That might not seem like much, but to me... The letter continued, and Russell's hands began to shake harder. There's one more thing I want to say, and it might seem strange, but I feel I must. If the person reading this happens to be that father from the park, the one with the kite, and the patient smile, and the children who loved him, I want you to know that you gave me hope when I had none. Watching your family reminded me that good things exist in the world, even if I couldn't have them myself. And if you're reading this now, if enough time has passed that your children might have grown distant or life has changed in ways you didn't expect, please know this: you had something beautiful. You were someone's whole world. Don't let that be forgotten. Don't let the connections slip away the way I let everything slip away. The final paragraph was brief. Maybe the person who finds this will understand what it means to create something and wonder if anyone will remember. Maybe they'll know what it's like to feel invisible. If so, I hope my story helps them feel less alone. We're all trying to matter. We're all hoping someone will see us. Thank you for seeing me. It was signed simply, Theodore Ashford, the 14th of March 2018. Russell sat in the silent storage unit, tears streaming down his face, the letter trembling in his hands. Theodore had watched him, had envied him, had hoped, impossibly, that Russell might be the one to find this message. And now Russell was sitting here, alone just as Theodore had been, reading words that seemed written specifically for him across the bridge of 20 years. The coincidence was impossible. The connection was undeniable. Theodore had left his legacy to fate, hoping someone would understand, and Russell had found it at exactly the moment he needed it most. Russell sat in that storage unit for over an hour, reading Theodore's letter again and again, trying to absorb the impossible weight of what he'd discovered. This wasn't just about recognizing a forgotten inventor anymore. This was about two lives that had intersected without either man knowing it, two trajectories of loneliness that had somehow circled back to meet. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the lockbox. Then he called Patricia. "I found something," he said when she answered. "Something that changes everything." They met that evening at her office, a small space in a building near the newspaper headquarters. Russell brought the letter, the lockbox, and copies of Theodore's journal entries from 1997 that mentioned the park. Patricia read the letter twice, her expression shifting from professional interest to something deeper. When she finished, she set it down gently and looked at Russell. "This is extraordinary," she said quietly. "The connection between you and Theodore, it's almost impossible to believe. I know, but it's also perfect for the story. Not in an exploitative way, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This makes Theodore's life mean something beyond the inventions. It shows that he touched someone's life without knowing it, and it shows that you were the right person to find his legacy. Russell nodded slowly. Can you include the letter in the article? I think I have to. It's the heart of the story. She looked at him seriously. But Mr. Danner, this will make you part of the narrative. People will want to know about you, about your family, about what happened after those days at the park. Are you comfortable with that? I don't know, Russell admitted. But Theodore deserves to have his full story told. And if my part in it helps people understand him better, then yes. Patricia spent the next hour asking Russell questions about his life, about his marriage, his children, the divorce, the years of silence. It was painful to talk about, but Russell forced himself to be honest. Theodore had been honest in his journals. Russell owed him the same. When does the article publish? Russell asked as they were finishing. 3 days. Tuesday morning, online first, then in Wednesday's print edition. I'll send you a draft tomorrow for approval. Russell left her office feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because the story was finally coming together. Heavier because he knew what it would mean: attention, questions, his private pain made public. On Monday morning, Patricia sent him the draft article. The headline read, "The Forgotten Genius: How One Man's Inventions Changed the World Without Credit, and How His Legacy Found the One Person Who Needed It Most." Russell read it on his laptop at his kitchen table. Patricia had done beautiful work. She'd woven together Theodore's technical innovations with his personal loneliness, showing how his brilliance was matched only by his isolation. She'd included excerpts from the journals, photographs of the prototypes, and expert testimony confirming that Theodore's designs had indeed preceded mainstream technology by years. And then, in the second half, she'd told Russell's story. The auction, the discovery, the connection. She'd quoted from Theodore's final letter, explaining the impossible coincidence that the man Theodore had watched at the park was now the guardian of his legacy. The article ended with Russell's words from their interview. Theodore spent his life hoping someone would see him. Now I'm making sure everyone does. And maybe, in the process, I'm learning to be visible again too. Russell approved the draft with a simple email. It's perfect. Thank you. That afternoon his daughter called. Dad, I've been thinking. I want to come this weekend, like I said. But I also want to bring something. What's that? Do you remember those home videos? The ones you used to record on the camcorder? Mom gave me the tapes after the divorce, and I've never watched them. I thought maybe we could watch them together. See those park days Theodore talked about? Russell's throat tightened. I'd like that. And, Dad? I talked to Greg. He's flying in too. He wants to be there when the article comes out. He says, her voice wavered, he says he's sorry, that he should have called more, that he let work and life get in the way of what mattered. Annie, you don't have to. We do, Dad, we really do. You were alone all this time and we let that happen. Just like Theodore was alone. We don't want that to be your story too. After they hung up, Russell sat at his table and cried. Not sad tears exactly. Something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just the release of years of holding everything in. Tuesday morning arrived. Russell woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. He made coffee and opened his laptop at exactly 6 a.m. when Patricia had said the article would go live. He refreshed the publication's homepage. There it was, featured at the top with a striking photograph, one of Theodore's prototypes next to a modern smartphone, showing how identical they were in concept despite being separated by decades. Russell clicked through and read the article again, even though he'd already memorized it. Then he scrolled down to the comments section. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, there were hundreds of comments, people sharing their own stories of feeling invisible, others expressing anger at the companies that had rejected Theodore, some offering to donate to a foundation in Theodore's name. By noon, Russell's phone was ringing constantly. News outlets requesting interviews. documentary producers wanting to option Theodore's story, a museum curator asking about displaying the prototypes. Annie arrived that evening with her husband and 2 children. Greg's flight landed an hour later, and Russell picked him up at the airport. The drive back to the apartment was quiet at first, both of them unsure what to say after so much time. "I read the article, Dad," Greg finally said. 3 times. "Yeah?" "It made me realize something. Theodore watched you be a good father and wished he could have that. But I had that, and I took it for granted. I let you slip away." Russell kept his eyes on the road. "We both let things slip." "No, Dad. You tried. You called. You reached out. I—" They pulled into the apartment parking lot. Before Russell could turn off the engine, Greg turned to him. "I want to fix this, not because of the article or the attention, because you're my father, and I've wasted years pretending I was too busy to care." Russell looked at his son, grown now, with grey starting to show in his hair, and saw the little boy who'd needed help with his kite. "You're here now," Russell said. "That's what matters." Inside the apartment, Annie had already started organizing. She'd brought the old VHS tapes, found Russell's ancient VCR in the closet, and hooked it up. The article went viral overnight. By Wednesday morning, Russell woke to find his phone flooded with notifications. Social media had caught fire with Theodore's story. The hashtag number Remember Theodore was trending. News aggregators had picked it up. Morning talk shows were discussing it. Russell sat at his kitchen table, his children on either side of him, scrolling through the responses together. The apartment felt smaller, with 3 adults crowded around the small table, but it also felt fuller than it had in years. There was coffee brewing, the smell of toast Annie had made, the sound of voices discussing something that mattered. "Listen to this one," Annie said, reading from her phone. "My grandfather was an inventor too. Died without anyone knowing what he'd created. Thank you for making sure Theodore didn't disappear completely." Greg pulled up another post. "This guy says he's a patent attorney, and he's been researching Theodore's rejected applications. He thinks at least 3 of them should have been approved. He's writing a legal analysis of the patent office's failures." Russell's phone rang. Walter's number. "Mr. Danner, have you seen the news this morning?" "I've seen some of it. Patterson Industries, one of the companies that rejected Theodore's battery design in 1982, just released a statement. They're issuing a public apology for failing to recognize his genius. They want to fund a fellowship in his name at MIT. Full tuition, living expenses, research budget. They're calling it the Theodore Ashford Fellowship for Independent Innovators." Russell felt something shift in his chest. "They're really doing that? It's already announced." Press release went out an hour ago, and they're not the only ones. 2 other tech companies have reached out to me this morning. They want to contribute to establishing the Theodore Ashford Innovation Center. We're talking significant funding, Mr. Danner. Enough to create scholarships, research grants, museum exhibitions. One company alone is pledging $500,000. After Russell hung up, he sat quietly while his children continued reading responses. His grandson, Tommy, a teenager who'd barely looked up from his phone since arriving, suddenly spoke. "Grandpa, people are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero. I just bought a storage unit." "No," Tommy said, showing Russell his phone. "Look at what they're saying. They're saying you gave Theodore the one thing he never had: someone who cared. Someone who wouldn't let him be forgotten." Russell took the phone and read the post Tommy had found. It was from a technology historian at Stanford. Russell Danner's dedication to honoring Theodore Ashford represents the best of humanity. In an age where we're constantly rushing forward, Danner stopped to ensure one forgotten man was finally seen. This is about more than inventions. It's about dignity, memory, and the profound act of witnessing another person's life. Danner could have sold the contents for profit. Instead, he chose to honor a stranger's legacy. That choice says everything about character. Annie reached over and squeezed Russell's hand. "Dad, you did something beautiful." I just did what felt right, Russell said quietly. Theodore deserved to be remembered. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. More calls came in, more messages arrived, more interview requests piled up. Patricia called to say the article had temporarily crashed the website from traffic. They'd had over 2 million views in the first 12 hours. Major news networks wanted Russell to appear on their morning shows. A documentary producer from Los Angeles left 3 voicemails. Walter stopped by in the afternoon with a briefcase full of legal documents. Companies wanted to partner with the Theodore Ashford Foundation. Universities were requesting permission to study the prototypes. Museums were competing to host exhibitions. We need to set up proper structures, Walter explained, spreading papers across Russell's table. A board of directors, bylaws, financial oversight. This has grown beyond what one person can manage. I don't know anything about running a foundation, Russell admitted. That's why we'll bring in people who do. But you'll remain the face of it, the guardian of Theodore's story. That's what matters. By evening, Russell felt overwhelmed. His small apartment was full of people, his children, his grandchildren, Walter with his paperwork, Patricia checking in about follow-up stories. The noise, the activity, the constant demands for his attention, it was chaos, but it was the opposite of the silence he'd lived with for so long. Emma, his younger granddaughter, sat beside him on the couch while the adults talked logistics. She was 9, quiet and observant. Grandpa, was Theodore sad his whole life? Russell looked down at her. I think he was lonely, sweetheart. That's not quite the same as sad. He loved his work. He loved creating things. But he wished he had people to share it with. Like you? Yeah, like me. For a while there I was pretty lonely too. But you're not lonely now, right? Because we're here. Russell put his arm around her. No, I'm not lonely now. That night, after everyone had gone to their hotels, Russell sat alone in his living room. But this time, the aloneness felt different, temporary, a pause between moments of connection rather than an endless state of being. He opened his laptop and checked the foundation website that Patricia had helped him set up. In just 2 days, over $50,000 had been donated in Theodore's name. The money would fund grants for independent inventors, people working outside the system, trying to be heard, just like Theodore had tried. An email notification appeared. The subject line read, "From Theodore's former employer." Russell opened it cautiously. It was from the CEO of the electronics firm where Theodore had worked in the early 1970s. Mr. Danner, I've spent the past 2 days reviewing our company's archives from the 1970s. We found records of Theodore Ashford's submissions, 14 separate proposals over a 5-year period. I'm ashamed to say that our predecessors dismissed his work without proper consideration. Several of his designs were marked too advanced for current manufacturing capabilities or no immediate profit potential. In hindsight, those assessments were catastrophically short-sighted. On behalf of our company, I want to offer a sincere apology and announce that we will be donating $1 million to the Theodore Ashford Innovation Fund. Additionally, we will be naming our new research building after him. We cannot undo the past, but we can honor his memory moving forward and ensure that independent voices like his are heard within our organization. Russell read the email 3 times. $1 million, a building named after Theodore, for the man who died alone, believing no one cared about his contributions. His phone buzzed with a text from Annie. Can't sleep, too much to process. But Dad, thank you for doing this. For Theodore, but also for showing us what really matters. You could have walked away from that storage unit. You could have sold everything and kept the money. Instead, you chose to honor a stranger. That's who you are, and I'm proud to be your daughter. Love you. Another text arrived, this one from Greg. Watching those old videos tonight made me realize how much time I wasted. How many years I let slip by without calling, without visiting, without being present. I can't get those years back, but I can make sure we don't waste any more. See you tomorrow. Thanks for not giving up on us." Russell set his phone down and walked to the window. 3 months passed in a way that felt both impossibly fast and deeply earned. Russell's life had transformed from quiet isolation into something he barely recognized: meetings with foundation boards, interviews with journalists, coordination with museums and universities. But more than any of that, his life was full of family again. Annie called twice a week, sometimes more. They talked about everything and nothing: her work, the kids' school activities, recipes she was trying, memories from when she was young. Real conversations, not the stilted small talk that had characterized their rare interactions before Theodore. Greg visited once a month, flying in from Colorado for long weekends. He'd bring his laptop and work remotely from Russell's apartment, content to just be in the same space as his father. The grandchildren knew Russell's voice now, asked him questions about Theodore, wanted to hear stories about the inventions and the man who'd created them. Russell had become visible again, not just to the world, but to the people who mattered most. On a Saturday in late spring, Russell stood in the auditorium of the newly dedicated Theodore Ashford Innovation Center. The space had been created in partnership with the local science museum, funded by the donations that continued to pour in. 3 rooms filled with Theodore's journals, prototypes and inventions, each one carefully preserved and displayed behind climate-controlled glass. Professional lighting illuminated the exhibits. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore Theodore's designs. Audio recordings of Theodore's voice played at listening stations throughout the space. The dedication ceremony had drawn hundreds of people: technology, historians, inventors, students, journalists, and curious members of the public filled every seat. Russell's children sat in the front row, along with his grandchildren. Patricia sat beside them, having become something of a family friend over the past months. Walter was there too, along with several board members of the newly established foundation. The museum curator, a woman named Dr. Harriet Yates, finished her speech about Theodore's contributions to modern technology. She'd spent weeks researching Theodore's work, bringing in experts to authenticate and contextualize each invention. Her presentation had been thorough and moving, highlighting not just the technical brilliance, but the human cost of being ignored. Theodore Ashford's story reminds us that genius isn't always recognized in its time. Dr. Yates concluded that innovation often comes from unexpected places, and that every voice, every idea, every person deserves to be heard. But none of us would be standing in this room today without the dedication of one man who refused to let Theodore be forgotten. She turned to Russell. "Mr. Danner, would you please join me?" Russell walked to the podium, his legs unsteady. Public speaking still made him nervous, even after dozens of interviews and presentations over the past months. But he'd prepared something for today. He needed to say this right. He looked out at the crowd, at all these faces gathered to honor a man who died believing no one cared. The auditorium was silent, expectant. "Theodore Ashford died alone," Russell began, his voice quiet but clear. "He spent his entire life creating, inventing, trying to contribute something meaningful to the world. And he spent that same life believing his work didn't matter, that he didn't matter because nobody was listening." He paused, gathering himself. "I understand that feeling. When I found Theodore's storage unit, I was living a life that felt invisible. My family had drifted away. My days were empty. I'd convinced myself that maybe it was just how things were supposed to be, that some people matter and some people don't. That my time of mattering had passed." Russell looked at his children. Annie was crying quietly, not trying to hide it. Greg sat forward, his full attention on his father. Tommy held Emma's hand. "But Theodore taught me something through his journals, through his work, through the letter he left behind. He taught me that we're all trying to matter. We're all hoping someone will see us, will acknowledge that we existed, that we tried, that we cared about something bigger than ourselves. His voice grew stronger. Theodore watched my family from a distance, decades ago. He sat on a bench at Maple Street Park and saw me with my children, teaching them to fly a kite. He envied what I had, that connection, that love, that sense of belonging to something. And now, through a coincidence that still feels impossible, his story has brought my family back to me. His loneliness helped me recognize my own. His regrets warned me not to let the same things slip away. Russell pulled Theodore's letter from his pocket. The paper was worn now from being handled so many times, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve, but still showing signs of age. Theodore wrote, "Don't let the connections slip away the way I let everything slip away." He was talking to me, across 20 years, warning me not to make his mistakes, not to let pride or hurt or time create distances that become impossible to cross. He looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with people in different sections. This center isn't just about honoring an inventor, though Theodore deserves that honor. It's not just about recognizing genius that went unacknowledged, though that recognition is long overdue. This center is about remembering that every person has value. Every voice deserves to be heard. Every life deserves to be remembered by someone who cares. It's about refusing to let people become invisible, to let their contributions be forgotten, to let their stories disappear. Russell's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through. Theodore gave me more than his inventions. He gave me a purpose when I had none. He gave me a reason to matter again. He reminded me that it's never too late to be seen, never too late to connect, never too late to remember what's important. He showed me that even at 64, even after years of loneliness, life can change, connections can be restored, meaning can be found. He held up the letter, his hands steady now. Theodore ended his final letter with these words: "We're all trying to matter. We're all hoping someone will see us. Thank you for seeing me." So I want to say this, here, in front of all of you, Theodore, I see you. We all see you. You mattered then, you matter now, and you'll matter to every person who walks through this center and learns your story. You'll matter to every young inventor who receives a grant in your name. You'll matter to everyone who hears your voice on those recordings and realizes they're not alone in feeling unseen. The applause was immediate and sustained. People stood, the sound filling the auditorium. Russell stepped away from the podium, overwhelmed by the response, and was immediately met by his children. Annie hugged him tightly. Her tears soaking into his shirt, Greg wrapped his arms around both of them. The grandchildren joined in, creating a family embrace that Russell had missed more than he'd let himself acknowledge. After the ceremony, Russell walked through the exhibition with his family. They stopped at each display, reading Theodore's journal entries carefully mounted behind glass, examining his prototypes arranged on custom stands, listening to his voice on the audio recordings available at stations throughout the space. Tommy paused in front of a display showing Theodore's touchscreen prototype next to a modern smartphone. The similarity was striking. Even a teenage eye could see the connection. "Grandpa, he really did invent this first, didn't he?" "He did," Russell said. 6 months after the museum opening, Russell found himself walking through Maple Street Park on a Sunday afternoon. The weather was perfect spring warmth without summer's oppressive heat, a light breeze that carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers. The park looked much the same as it had in 1997. The same playground equipment, though freshly painted. The same oak trees, though taller now, their branches reaching further. And the same bench where Theodore used to sit, tucked along the path near the open field where families flew kites. Russell had arranged for a small bronze plaque to be installed on that bench. Nothing elaborate, just a simple acknowledgement. He'd paid for it himself, wanting this one piece of Theodore's memory to be personal, separate from the museum and the foundation and all the public recognition. The plaque had been installed yesterday. Russell wanted to see it, to sit where Theodore had sat, to close the circle that had begun when Theodore watched Russell's family all those years ago. He found the bench easily. The plaque gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. In memory of Theodore Ashford, 1941 to 2018, who found wonder in others' joy, and reminded us all that every life matters. Russell sat down slowly, his hand running over the smooth bronze. He could picture Theodore here, alone, watching families play, wishing he could be part of something bigger than himself. "Russell?" He turned. Annie was walking toward him, her 2 children running ahead. Behind her, Greg approached with his wife. They'd all driven in to meet him, making this a family occasion without Russell having to ask. "You found it," Russell said, standing to hug his daughter. "Of course we did." She looked at the plaque, read it quietly, then smiled through tears. "It's perfect, Dad." Tommy and Emma were already at the playground. Greg's wife joined them, giving the rest of the family space. "Should we?" Greg asked, holding up a red kite he'd brought from his car. Russell laughed, surprised. "You brought a kite? Seemed appropriate, don't you think?" Full circle. They walked to the open field, the same place where Russell had flown kites with Annie and Greg decades ago. The same place Theodore had watched from his bench, envious and alone. Greg handed the kite to Tommy. "Your grandpa taught me how to do this. Now I'll teach you." Russell watched his son show his grandson how to hold the string, how to feel the wind, how to run and let the kite catch the air. It took 3 tries, just like it always had. Each time the kite crashed, they laughed and tried again. On the 4th attempt, the kite soared. Tommy's face lit up with pure joy, and Greg stood beside him, one hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him gently. Russell sat on Theodore's bench and watched. This time, he wasn't the father in the field. He was the man on the bench, witnessing joy from a distance. But unlike Theodore, Russell wasn't alone in his watching. Annie sat beside him, her arm linked through his. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," Russell said softly, just thinking about Theodore. How he sat here and saw what I took for granted. How he tried to tell me, years later, not to let it slip away. "But you didn't. You heard him." "We heard him," Russell corrected. "You came back. Greg came back. We all found our way back to each other." Annie squeezed his arm. "The foundation got another big donation yesterday, some tech company in California. They want to fund 10 more research grants in Theodore's name." "That's good. He'd be glad to know his name is helping other inventors." "Do you think he knows somehow that we remember him?" Russell looked at the plaque, at Theodore's name preserved in bronze. "I don't know, but I hope so. I hope he knows he mattered." They sat quietly for a while, watching Greg and Tommy with the kite. Other families were in the park now, parents pushing children on swings, a couple having a picnic, teenagers playing frisbee. Life continuing, connections forming, moments being created that would someday become memories. Russell thought about his apartment, which no longer felt empty. Annie had hung new photos on his walls, pictures from the museum opening, photos of the grandchildren, images of the whole family together again. His refrigerator was covered with drawings from Tommy and Emma. His phone buzzed regularly with texts and calls. He'd started volunteering at the Theodore Ashford Innovation Center twice a week, giving tours, telling Theodore's story to visitors. He'd met other people there, volunteers, donors, inventors, inspired by Theodore's perseverance. He'd made friends, real friends, for the first time in years. His life had meaning again, purpose, connection. "Dad," Annie asked, "what are you thinking about?" "Just that I'm grateful for Theodore, for the storage unit, for the impossible coincidence that brought his story to me, for all of it. Even the hard parts, the loneliness before." Russell considered that. "Even those. Because they helped me understand Theodore. They made me the right person to find him, to care enough to make sure he wasn't forgotten." Greg jogged over, breathless and grinning. "Tommy's a natural. The kite's been up for 15 minutes straight. They walked back to join the kids. Russell took a turn holding the kite string, feeling the pull of wind and fabric, the same sensation he'd felt decades ago when his children were young, the same joy Theodore had watched from his bench. Before they left the park, Russell stood at the bench one more time. He placed his hand on the plaque, on Theodore's name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for watching, for remembering, for leaving your story where I could find it. You weren't alone at the end, and neither am I." Annie called to him from the parking lot. Russell turned and walked toward his family, his daughter, his son, his grandchildren, all waiting for him. That evening, back at his apartment, Russell opened his journal. He'd started keeping one after reading Theodore's, finding comfort in putting his thoughts to paper. He wrote, "Today we honored Theodore at the park. Flew kites where he used to watch us. I sat on his bench and understood finally what he was trying to tell me. Life is about connection, about being seen and seeing others, about mattering to someone. Theodore spent his life invisible, and so did I, for a while. But we're both visible now, both remembered, both proof that it's never too late to matter, never too late to be found. We saved each other, he and I, two forgotten men who refused to stay forgotten." Russell closed the journal and looked around his apartment, photos on the walls, drawings on the fridge. A text message from Greg saying good night, plans with Annie for next weekend. He wasn't invisible anymore. Neither was Theodore. And that made all the difference.